David, you've shared with us how central practices are to your understanding of the lived Christian life and what you think is one of the central elements of any congregation, but certainly a congregation of young people in a youth ministry. And anybody who knows your work or who's just taken off the shelf your wonderful book, Practicing Discernment with Youth, knows that discernment is one of the places that you really think has been neglected and one of the practices you want to emphasize. You shared with us today that, and in the book, that some of your work is really based on studying and exercises with youth that led to the creation of this stages of discernment exercises. Can you share how you got there and what the stages are?
Well, as I have shared with you, and I did youth ministry for about 23 some odd years before doing doctoral work, and so I had some sense of the kinds of yearnings and capacities that young people had. And so, as I said earlier, I wanted to create space to empower young people to be creative and to be active agents of faith in the world. And so I had some sense about the kinds of activities that had been successful in my sort of trial and error approach to youth ministry during those 23 years. And so I was drawing in part from experience, but also drawing from a vast literature on educational models, inquiry-based education, Paulo Freire's work, of pedagogy of the oppressed, working with impoverished villages in Brazil. And so, and then in my own field, religious education, Thomas Groom's work in shared praxis, his book on shared praxis. So I was constructing this approach in conversation with that literature, but also having knowledge about Ignatian practices of discernment and Quaker practices of discernment, and how the Reformed tradition sort of democratized decision-making, and how that became part of the discernment for that tradition. And so I was in conversation with all of these different sources, and so the four movements that I identified as ways of sort of capturing what I saw as the best of all of these different sources and traditions, I tried to capture them in four movements: listening, understanding, remembering, dreaming, and acting. And so listening, in short, is simply teaching youth to listen to the world around them and to their own responses to that world. And so where their hearts are broken, where they feel recruited. The Ignatian practices, Ignatius used to recommend the examen, for example, as a practice for monks at the end of the day. Where have you seen life today, and where have you seen life draining from us? And so that also was a practice of attending, listening to life. And so I thought that was valuable practice for helping young people attend to their own lives and the Spirit's leading and the possibilities for becoming agents of faith in their world. And so listening, understanding is simply a matter of analyzing a context, analyzing a situation, trying to understand its moving parts. Why is there racism? Of course there are psychological, interrelational aspects, but there are also economic, political, cultural, scientific aspects to racism. And so it's important to deconstruct, to analyze those themes so that we understand in greater fullness what these different themes are about. And then remembering and dreaming, in other words, is simply prayer and theological reflection. How do we find ways of making sense of adolescent situations in and through the biblical text, in and through the systematic theologies of our different traditions, in and through the sermons, the hymns, all of the different resources that we have at hand. How do we find ways of making sense of oppression, racism, tension between adults and youth, and a vast other themes that we might address? So that's what we're doing. That's what we're up to there in the third movement. And of course, prayer, is a significant part of Ignatian discernment practice. You do the work of the head, do the work of the mind, and then you do the work of the heart. You sit with the decision over time, having analyzed a situation, and you let truth bubble up, which is also a part of its Quaker language. So prayer has a role in discernment, and then acting is simply trying to, collaboratively get a sense for how we as young people and the larger church, mobilized in and by young people, can be agents of faith in changing the situations that are distortions in our culture, those that aren't life-giving for young people or the communities they live in. And so that's what the four movements are up to. I'm not making any claims that this is the best practice of discernment or the only practice, but it's a practice that I have found makes sense to a lot of the young. They intuitively understand the categories and are able to think in these terms.